We have arrived at the famous Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps in Stavelot for the running of the Belgian Grand Prix, the longest track on the GP4 OC calendar. Coming into this week, 3 teams have been making the headlines this week. The first team news of this year's silly season comes from Mercedes, as to the surprise of literally no one, so cue the memes again, they have announced that reigning world champion Franco Lopez and current championship contender Amar Kar will remain with the team for another season. Amar is having another great season at Mercedes despite his concern about the car during the early part of the season, mainly in qualifying. He currently lies second in the Drivers' Championship, 15 points behind championship leader Franco Gamba, and his team Mercedes lies second in the Constructors, also 15 points behind Red Bull. Despite this year's Mercedes being inconsistent during qualifying, he has usually made up for it in the races thanks to the brilliant race pace the Merc has had this season, which has kept him in the hunt for the title. He will hope to achieve his first ever world title by the end of the season and hope that next season's Mercedes will be better to drive in qualifying than it has been this season. In terms of Franco Lopez, despite a rough start to the season, he has finally started to pick up form despite not winning a race so far this season. He currently lies 4th in the Drivers' Championship, tied for 3rd with George Roque, and as mentioned earlier, his team Mercedes currently lies 2nd in the Constructors, 15 points behind Red Bull. Lopez arguably should have had a win this season, with Austria being the most notable when he was leading the race before sustaining damage from the wheel of Jesus Perennin's Renault as a result of him sustaining damage from his teammate Evan Byrne's car. Franco will be hoping to get back to winning ways in the second half of the season and hope he can gain enough ground to win his 3rd world title and then defend it the following season. The second team news of the day comes from AlphaTauri, as they have announced that German driver David Kupok will remain with the team for another season. David is having an amazing year in 2021, despite this year's AlphaTauri being arguably the worst car on the grid. He currently lies 20th in the Drivers' Championship, 2 points behind fellow German Felix Sonntag, and his team AlphaTauri lie 9th in the Constructors, 1 point behind Williams. Despite arguably having the worst car on the grid, David is undeniably having his best ever season in the top class due to the heroic drives he's been pulling in that AlphaTauri, with many being surprised that he didn't go for the vacant Red Bull seat left by Franco Gamba. He'll hope to continue his impressive momentum into 2022 and hope that next year's AlphaTauri will be a much better car compared to this year. The only question remaining at AlphaTauri is who will partner alongside him. However, it is looking more likely that Miklos Gau will remain with the team for another season unless his performances start to drop massively, which could bring current Formula E Championship leader Santino Andreoli into play. But like with many things in the past, we will have to wait and see. The final team news of today concerns Lamborghini, as they have announced that 5-time race winner Laura Chung will remain with the team for their 2nd ever season. Laura is having an amazing season in 2021, with her arguably having her best ever season in the top class. She currently lies 8th in the Drivers' Championship, 5 points ahead of former teammate Joseph Wellows, and her team Lamborghini lie 5th in the Constructors, 10 points ahead of McLaren. Laura took a gamble on going to Lamborghini in 2021 in the hope that the team would have a decent rookie season in the top class, and it is fair to say that the move has paid off, with Lamborghini having an impressive rookie season, so much so that Laura returned to winning race this season back at the Austrian Grand Prix. She will look to continue her impressive season for the rest of 2021 and hope that Lamborghini can build on their rookie season to go further up the grid in 2022. The only question remaining at Lamborghini is who will partner alongside her, as that has become more interesting than originally thought. Last week in the pilot episode, I mentioned that this year's silly season could be the most straightforward in a long time. However, in the case of 3 teams, that might not be the case after all, as Evan Byrne's departure from Renault may have created a domino effect. Last week I said that Jesus Perennin was more likely to remain at Renault for another season. However, after Julius Anderson's impressive performance at Hungary last week, it might not be that secure, as both Romain Quarg, who is also a contender for Renault, and Julius Anderson could boot Jesus out of the Renault seat, however potentially not from the top class due to another team he has put down as his second choice, but we will get onto that in a bit. On the other hand, if Julius misses out on a Renault drive to both Jesus Perennin and Romain Quarg, then surprisingly there is another team that he could end up being a contender for. That team, as you may have figured out, is Lamborghini, as there is a chance that Rahul Patel, despite what I said last week, might not be so secure at Lamborghini given the situation at Renault. However, there is another team that is linked with the whole Renault-Lamborghini situation, which may also surprise you. That team being current Constructors' Championship leaders Red Bull. We mentioned last week that Evan Byrne was more likely going to be a contender to replace Franco Gamba at Red Bull in 2022 as a result of the Irishman leaving Renault at the end of the 2021 season. While that is still the case, however, in terms of who could be his teammate at Red Bull should the Irishman be signed there, it isn't that simple. Last week we mentioned that George Roque was likely to remain at the team for another season, however that isn't as secure as what we thought, as that is due to the Renault-Lamborghini situation. Both Jesus Perinen and Rahul Patel have Red Bull as their second choice, and if either one of them miss out on their number one choice, then they could have a shout at booting George out of Red Bull. If George wants to be retained at Red Bull, then he either needs to hope that Jesus and Rahul get retained at their respective teams, or put in some brilliant performances in the second half of the season to ensure he gets retained at the Milton Keynes based team. It will be fascinating to see what will happen to Renault, Lamborghini and Red Bull during this silly season, as when we all thought that was pretty much done and dusted, it has now become very, very interesting. And that is it for this week's edition of the GP4 OC News. The next team news will break next week at the Italian Grand Prix in Monza, who will be announced due to practice next week at the Autodromo Nazionale di Monza, just on the outskirts of Milan. Hello everybody and welcome to round 12 of the 2021 GP4 Offline Championship. We are here at the famous Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps in Stavelot for the running of the Belgian Grand Prix, the longest track on the calendar. I am JW97 and I am joined today by the same person who joined me yesterday during the World Champ Car coverage. It is my arch nemesis, Ra.
Yep, hello everybody.
Who is probably a bit surprised by the last bit of the news, if I'm being totally honest. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Anyway, as you may have seen on your screen, we have got wet weather driving for practice, and it is monsoon conditions, of course. But there is a chance that there may be a slight chance the conditions could get a little bit lighter to normal wet conditions, but it's only a small chance. But for the majority, we will be having extreme wet weather tyre running. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, There are two test drivers in the car for today. One of them being Daniel Adventure, who will be driving the Red Bull today in place of George Roque, and the other one being Bartosz Kloss, who will be driving the Haas today in place of Amelia Wilson. And so only two test drivers in the car today, so you will be seeing them quite soon. As yeah, and the way there was Kloss, you just saw him there, and there is Adventure, as both of them getting ready to do their practice session here at Belgium in extreme wet conditions. As you can see, we have the grey band around the outside, and it should be quite an interesting session. Of course, last season, you may remember, Ra, it was quite an interesting race when it was wet here in Belgium. You may remember the crashes that we had at the top of Radion, of course. Two notable ones, one being Franco Gamba when he lost the back end coming out of Radion, and of course George Roque, who somehow survived not crashing out at the top of Radion. It was crazy last season, wasn't it, Ra?
Yep, indeed. You could say it was one of the craziest races of the season. Even though we had like 9 finishers in that year, basically.
It was also the race as well where we saw one of the strangest retirements, it's fair to say, and so much so that it's turned into a bit of a gif on Discord, and Ra put it down for us. The throttle issue that involved Laura Chung, where her Ferrari decided to go into full reverse and smash into the wall. So, yeah, so in the case of those three, then we're hoping that's not the same case this season. But Felix Sontag is out on the racetrack for Williams, but we might as well get on with what we heard in the team news, of course. First of all, before we get on to the bit that was right at the end of the video, we might as well talk about the ones that got retained. Mercedes retaining Franco Lopez and Amar Khan. What a shock, right? No, I'm joking. Who am I kidding? Not really a surprise, is it? I mean, they've both done exceptionally well, and, well, it's practically become a meme at this point.
Yeah, it became a meme ever since they got retained in 2020. But of course, it's a bit of, not much of a surprise. And yeah, of course, they're both doing well. Cause doing well, even though he had some criticism before that. But yeah, he's done well. Lopez has done well to pick it up. Will he be able to get his first wins this season? We'll find out.
Still eludes him this season, and as I mentioned in the news video, so he's arguably should have had a win this season, the Austrian Grand Prix being the most notable out of that, of course. Also, it wasn't just the Mercedes that got announced today. We also found out that David Kupok is being retained by AlphaTauri for next season, so no real surprise on that one, really. But I think it's fair to say a lot of people were surprised that he didn't go for a higher seat.
Yeah, people would have thought that David Cooper could have gone for Red Bull, but I think knowing the fact that the Evan Byrne decided to leave Renault and not even put Renault in his choices, I think it kind of compromised him, and he pretty much had to stick with AlphaTauri. And I mean, he had a better chance on getting AlphaTauri, so yeah. I mean, he should be glad he's staying, but I think would be a little bit disappointed that he could have gotten a better seat.
Yes, indeed. But either way, he will still be on the top class grid next season, and he will be hoping that the AlphaTauri next season will be a much better car than what it has been this season. Because arguably, as I said in the video, it has been arguably the worst car on the grid.
Yeah, of course, it has been the worst car on the grid, but it is, funny enough, pretty competitive in the straights, but it's nowhere near in the corners. So yeah, but in the constructors table, it doesn't really show it, but in car performance, it does.
Indeed, but obviously David Kupak has been dragging a lot of performance, although most of those points have gone to Miguel Gal this season thanks to that amazing podium that he got at the Monaco Grand Prix. And of course, the final news that came out as well is that Laura Chung will remain at Lamborghini for another season. And of course, we've talked about her a little bit earlier on about how she had that weird retirement here last season when her throttle was left open when she was at Ferrari. But she will remain at Lamborghini for another season. Fully deserved, obviously, because it's safe to say, Ross, she's having possibly her best ever season in the top class.
Yeah, best ever season overall in the top class, of course. I mean, it's clearly better than 2018, 2019, and 2020, of course. And yeah, even though she had a quicker car in the Ferrari in 2019, she pretty much underperformed in the ratings. So yeah, she would have been disappointed in that one. But I mean, this season it's been a breakthrough for Laura Chung.
Yep, and she will be hoping that next season's Lamborghini will take what they've known from this impressive rookie season that they've had and hopefully get a little bit further up the grid in 2022. Now we get on to the interesting bit that I alluded to in the news video. So you guys may remember back on Friday, because this was when we had the sign-up call, what Yuri put on Discord, if anybody's on there. He said in that put, okay, it turns out it's not as simple as what we thought. That was what I just said there in the news video about Renault, Lamborghini and Red Bull. That was what Yuri was referring to because, well, we thought last week they were going to be very straightforward. But as it turns out, not as straightforward. And obviously, it's kind of funny I'm asking you this because you're kind of involved in that little equation that's going on with those three teams.
Yeah, of course, I'm not the only rookie involved in these three teams, of course. And yeah, it's funny that you asked me this, but yeah, of course, it was never easy, even before Hungary or even after Hungary. It was never gonna be easy, and yeah, as soon as Yuri pointed that out, yeah, it's gonna be a tough goal for you guys to decide who will be in those seats.
So, you know, when Yuri said that then on Friday, did you realise straight away what he was referring to, but you didn't want to say it until it got mentioned, basically?
Kind of. Just didn't
We'll
want to
leave,
mention
we'll
it.
leave it at no. Leave it at no comment then.
Yeah.
Laura Chung tries to find a way through on one of the Williamses there. But obviously, it's not just your name, as you alluded to as well, because the thing is, Renault, Lamborghini, and Red Bull are all tied together, and it's thanks to, well, I mentioned it being Evan Byrne's departure from Renault, but it's also in a way thanks to the announcement about Franco Gamba's retirement from the top class back at the Portuguese Grand Prix that has pretty much caused all of this, because Renault is not that secure as what we thought. Nor is Lamborghini, and nor is Red Bull. Because, of course, Perinen could get booted out of Renault in favour of Roman Quagg and Julius Anderson, because those two are also a contender for Renault, along with Jesus, obviously. You also have the Lamborghini situation, which Ra could get himself booted out of, as Julius Anderson could be a contender if he misses out on the Renault seat. And then you've got the whole thing with Red Bull, where obviously we're expecting Evan Byrne to be at the team. That's obviously not going to change. But in terms of whether George Rote will still be there, that's going to be another question. Because if he doesn't perform in this second half of the season, and either Perinen or Patel lose out on the number one choice, they could boot Rote out, which could make things very, very interesting indeed.
Yeah, it's pretty much the biggest talking points right now. Now since it's been mentioned, and yeah, of course, Patel pretty much lagging a bit, but of course, he can perform, but of course, Rogue can is somewhat of a second half of the season performer, as we see Federi
He's
having
got a
an oil
problem.
leak.
Yep, so we're going to have to interrupt that for a moment, as Videri has got an oil leak, which means that's the end of his practice session, because, of course, we do have the spare car ban in there. An oil leak is taking care of Andre Videri. Of course, Andre Videri, as you know, obviously has been quite unlucky this season, it's fair to say. Of course, in the first part of the season, it didn't go particularly well for him, but in the last few races, he's finally shown the pace that we knew him to have back last season in 2020, but he's still the only driver this season yet to score a point this season. And, well, we mentioned, Rod, that it's looking likely he's going to leave Alfa Romeo given the pick order, and he is a contender, of course, for Aston Martin, but obviously he's got some competition he needs to overcome if he wants to stay in the top class.
Yeah, he really needs to pick it up and hope and try and get points, and he really needs points because he, if he wants to remain remain in the top class and be Aston Martin up pretty much. But yeah, it's very tight, and he is a man really under pressure.
Yep, as Yuri's currently sorting things out at the moment, hence why you can't hear the audio in the background, because he's ensuring that Videri doesn't get back out on the track because, of course, of the spare car ban. But that's his session done with, I'm afraid, and we won't be seeing him out on track again until qualifying. So, anyway, we look now at Felix Sontag in the Williams, and back to the whole topic with the whole Renault, Lamborghini, Red Bull situation. It's, as I said, going to be very, very interesting to see, because who knows really which way that could go about. But obviously there is one thing to talk about. It could involve a couple of drivers losing out on seats, of course, in the top class if that whole situation ends up getting crazy. Mainly, of course, if we're talking on the lines of Roman Quarg and, of course, George Roque, of course, because pretty much for them, really, it's their first choice or nothing, really, because all their other choices they're invalid for. So if that were the case, of course, we could lose both of them from the top class next season, of course, because if Jesus and Julius end up being the lineup at Renault next season, and we end up having, let's say, for example, Evan, or we'll just say, for example, you as an example, because I said Renault, of course. I said Anderson and Perinen for Renault. We could end up in a situation where George and Roman could be out of a drive. But who knows, really? This second half of the season could really turn this thing about. And, well, it's going to get very, very crazy for those three teams.
Yep, indeed, and of course it will take a lot of time to see who will get them, but yeah, those guys do really need to perform and pick it up.
Indeed so, as Roman Quarg, meanwhile, is now in the pits, and of course, unlike his teammate, will be able to go out a little bit later on. But whilst we were talking, Chatfield is at the top of the timing sheets ahead of both Lopez and Gamba, who have set an identical time to each other, as you may have noticed there, but Lopez is ahead because he set the time before Gamba did. So he's second, Gamba in third position, so very interesting there. Luckily, this isn't qualifying, of course, so we don't need to remember that when we get onto the menu screen and read out the results. But anyway, we're riding on board with Daniel Adventure, of course, the Red Bull test driver. Also, we have Bartosz Kloss out there on the track as well for Haas, who's also the Haas test driver, and might as well come on to the topic of Kloss for a couple of reasons. Obviously, he raced here yesterday, as we commented yesterday, Ra, in World Champ Car, so he's obviously got Spa fresh in his mind, it's fair to say, but it's obviously we know he's the Haas test driver, and it's kind of coincidental we mentioned this because, of course, he is a contender for Haas, as we know, and we're expecting Amelia Wilson to potentially leave the team at the end of the season due to the pick order as a result of her putting Alfa Romeo down as her first choice. But how do you rate Kloss's chances, perhaps, of potentially making it back into the top class, Rod? Do you think he's got a very good chance, or do you think he's got some tough competition to overcome if he wants to get back in?
I think he does have a good chance. I can't say he has a very good chance. I mean, you can't rule out the competition, and the competition's still there. So you got to give the competition a chance to fight for it.
Indeed, and it will, as you said, we'll be fascinated to see if Kloss will return to the grid next season. Of course, there's a few guys in that fight who could make a return to the top class. In fact, most of the contenders are all former top class drivers, so it will be interesting to see which direction Haas end up going in, of course. And so that will be one to keep an eye out for in the next few weeks or so. Meanwhile, we're running on board with Joseph Wells, who's currently getting held up by one of the Renault drivers. I'm not sure which Renault driver that was he was currently getting held up by, but he doesn't improve nonetheless, and he stays in the fourth position, still behind Lopez and Gamba, who of course tied on the same lap time, or was, because Lopez has just basically given me the middle finger there and gone a little bit quicker. So and so has Gamba at the same time, but neither of them have gone on to the same sort of lap time there. So now Lopez has stretched his advantage a little bit over Gamba, and they're now no longer on the same lap time as Loa Chung, who has obviously been confirmed to be remaining at Lamborghini for next season, is back in the pits, and obviously we'll be expecting him to come back out a little bit later on, of course, as Chung makes her way into the pit lane now then in the Lamborghini, as we have just 27.5 minutes to go in this session, as we now look at Felix Sontag, who's currently where is he at the moment? He's currently in 21st position. So we kind of talked about all the facilities and stuff. We might as well talk about the race that happened last week in Hungary, because eventually I got the highlights out yesterday, if anybody who's wondering. It took a little bit of a while to upload the highlights because George had not got round to doing commentary until Sunday. He was quite a busy person during the weekend, but eventually he got round to doing it, hence why both the English and Hungarian versions of the Hungarian Grand Prix highlights, too many Hungarians in that one sentence, I know, but eventually it came out yesterday, and so it's now up on YouTube as Adventure tries to have a go at Q-Pop there, but it doesn't work out, and in fact he's coming into the pits anyway, so that's that run for Adventure done with. But yeah, in terms of last week, of course, it was pretty much Red Bull domination, Ra. 1-2 finish for Red Bull, their first 1-2 of the season, with Gamba getting another victory this season and stretching his advantage to 15 points out of Armar.
Yeah, and the first stop really worked for the Red Bulls, and they took it, and they were out of this universe, out of anyone's league, pretty much, and yeah, they were in control of that race.
Indeed. And just give me a moment. So, obviously, George Roque had a chance to win that race, and just give me a moment, Ron. I'm just typing something there. There's a little bit extra in the stream chat. But obviously Red Bull completely dominated that race. Of course, one person we need to pay off as Gamba goes up to second. Evan Byrne finally made his way back onto the podium after what has been a trickier season for the Irishman. And, well, it's kind of coincidental, really, that as soon as he announces that he's leaving Renault, he starts finishing races all of a sudden and finishing quite well.
Maybe that's the middle finger to Renault, pretty much. Just performance.
I think you meant to say try not signing for multiple people, Yuri. So anyway, but yeah, it was quite a good race for Evan Byrne, and obviously, as you say, maybe making his feelings quite clear about Renault this season. Armar Carr finished in fourth, and we might as well talk about this, Ra, because they've went all season without doing this, but at the Hungarian Grand Prix, it happened again. Lopez and Carr coming together. When will they ever stop, Ra?
Well, it took long enough for them to avoid colliding, but now they have collided in Hungary. So yeah, was inevitable. Will it happen multiple times? Maybe, maybe 2 or 3 times consecutive. If it happens consecutively, then yeah, there'll be tensions between those two.
I think there kind of already is in a way, because they made contact several times in the last couple of seasons, and in their third season together, it's happened again. This time at the infamous Turn 1 at the Hungarian Grand Prix. So who knows really if any more will happen for the rest of the season. As David Q-Pop, meanwhile, comes into the pits, the man, of course, who will remain at AlphaTauri for next season, and hoping that the car will be better in 2022. Obviously, as well, the man of the moment, of course, at the Hungarian Grand Prix, and I alluded to it obviously in the news video, was of course Julius Anderson, finishing in fifth position as Joseph Willows goes to the chop and gets immediately beaten by Chris Chatfield by a tenth of a second. But as I was saying, Julius Anderson finishing in fifth last time. In fact, it was a good weekend as well for Aston Martin. A double points finish. We don't really talk too much about Roland Mottren. His performance kind of got underrated a little bit, but fifth and ninth for Aston Martin, given the car they've got this season. Pretty good performance. It's fair to say they've, given the car they've got, both Julius and Roland have been overachieving quite a bit, it's fair to say, and currently seventh in the Constructors.
Yeah, and given that that Hungary was a downforce track, I mean, it would suit the Aston Martin because the Aston Martin is pretty much draggy, and yeah, they took the chances and they got the result that they deserved.
Indeed so, as we now look at Armar Carr, who's now going to try and overtake that is Laura Chung. He's getting past there down the Kemmel Straight. He's currently up on his personal best, probably got a little bit of help from Slipstream there. I'm not seeing the signs of the conditions improving at this stage. I mean, we saw on the weather forecast there is a slight chance that it could lighten up a little bit to normal wet weather running, but at the moment I've not seen any signs of that being the case. But yeah, a good weekend for Aston Martin, and they're looking to see if they can do a good job here at the Belgian Grand Prix. Of course, this is more of a high-speed track, so be interested to see who's got the best engine for this track, of course. And if anything, if pre-season testing is anything to go by from many months ago, and also from what we've seen from the season, you would expect Red Bull to possibly be strong around here, but you never know, of course. But anyway, also as well, happened at the Hungarian Grand Prix. It's fair to say, Laura Chung, I obviously retired last time out at the Hungarian Grand Prix and was running quite well and was in contention for a podium finish. But I should point out as well that I'm very surprised, having done the highlights whilst editing it back, of course. I was a little bit surprised how we didn't catch that originally, because you do see that on the highlights she does veer to the right off the screen, really. So I'm a little bit surprised that none of us in the stream chat, and even Neri, not one of us noticed that until the yellow flags came out. So bit surprising there. I guess we need to really open our eyes a little bit more on that one. But anyway, disappointing for Laura, really, because she was looking good for a podium in that race.
Yeah, and pretty much cost Lamborghini even more points for the team's championship. Could have closed the gap to Ferrari maybe, or even pulled away from McLaren.
Yep, and currently, as we speak right now, the battle for fifth in the constructors is only 10 points now between Lamborghini and McLaren, and so far Willows has looked particularly strong in this session. Whether that's due to the wet weather conditions or whether the McLaren has got some good pace around here, I'm not sure, because considering where De Rose is down in 14th, I'm not 100% sure where the McLaren is at this stage. But anyway, and Byrne just coming out of P1 now then, as he's currently being followed by, I think that's his teammate behind. Yes, it is. So both Renaults together on the same bit of track. But yeah, so obviously for Jesus Perinen, we might as well talk about it whilst we were talking about Renault. A weekend to forget, really, at the Hungarian Grand Prix, scoring no points. And, well, it's been brought up a few times throughout the season, but Renault just getting it all wrong with Jesus' strategy.
Yep, indeed. I mean, you could say this is one of Jesus Pernin's worst races in his career. Yeah, because he rarely gets bad races, and this is definitely one of his worst races in his entire OC career.
Try and overtake his teammate into the chicane, which he does pretty simply as Mikkel Skau comes into the pits. But yeah, a race to forget for him, and he'll want to move on. As in fact, I think that's Byrne that's coming into the pits there. Meanwhile, Roman Quagga's just gone up into fourth place in the Alfa Romeo. Of course, a contender for Renault. You may remember, of course, last season that he actually put Renault down as his first choice to try and go for the team for this season, but of course he missed out on the seat, only just though, to Jesus Perinen, and hence why he ended up at Alfa Romeo this season. But he's got another chance to possibly go to Renault, but as we talked about earlier, it could be one of three people who could end up with those two seats. Luckily, Manisha Kauter, but at least we can say one thing about Renault. Well, I said Sauber because it kind of refers to what I was talking about there. At least Renault have not got either Manisha Kauterborn or Zach Brown running their team, because otherwise they'd end up signing 20 drivers for two seats, and that'd be a bit of a problem. So It's going to be a bit of a tough one to deal with Renault because they've obviously got three contenders and very strong contenders in Jesus Perrin and Roman Quag and of course Julius Anderson. So we'll be interested to see if Roman ends up at Renault. But as we sit here right now, Ra, would you say that he is a favourite to get one of those seats at least, or do you think Julius and Jesus might have a bit of an edge on him?
Considering the fact that he is a DTM champion, he he is a favorite. I mean, Julius is one, but I mean that was from a couple of seasons ago. No, but yeah, he could be one of the favorites. I mean, I can't say he's the favorite. I do believe Jesus Brennan is the favorite, only just, but it is very tight between Jesus Brennan, Roman Quagg, and Julius Anderson. So you never know. It's very tight between those three.
Indeed. Well, whatever the case, given what we've seen this season, when they're not making strategy blunders, that is, Renault do have a very good car, it's fair to say. Meanwhile, the Red Bull test driver, Daniel Adventure, has now gone to the top of the timing sheets by nearly 4 tenths of a second on a 2 minute 3.510. Due to the wet conditions and due to how long the track is, we're seeing lap times in the 2 minute zones, as Adventure is just under 4 tenths in front of Chris Chatfield at this stage, as Kirishima DeRosa has now made his way back into the pits for McLaren. But yeah, it will be interesting to see with that whole Renault situation. As meanwhile, speaking of Renaults, Evan Byrne is currently up on his personal best as he comes out of the final chicane. As Quag further improves, as he goes up into fourth. In fact, he gets in front of Franco Garma because he did drop down to fifth when Adventure went to the top of the time sheets there. As Galloway, meanwhile, is currently being held up. Byrne did improve, but only into 11th position, and I'll be very curious to see what the Renault is like around here in the dry conditions at Spa-Francorchamps as Galloway tries to find a way through on Rahul Patel here, but it's not going to work out. Patel staying in front for the time being, and as now they're going to get joined by one of the Williamses coming out onto the racetrack there. Fraser, meanwhile, improves to go up into 17th, as Anderson only 19th on that occasion, as Aston Martin clearly struggling with one lap pace, it seems, at the moment, and it's been a kind of a constant thing for Aston Martin throughout this season. As we saw, Byrne was up on his personal best in the first sector. As Galloway, is he now about to get by on Rahul Patel into Lacombe? And he is, so he gets booed there, but unfortunately he's got some more traffic to deal with in the form of that Williams that's in front. Only Garma, Carr, DeRosa, and of course Vaderi in the pit lane. Of course, Vaderi is not going to take part for the remainder of the session thanks to his oil leak that he had during this session, which ended his practice session, and he will not be allowed to return to the track until qualifying due to the spare car ban. Anyway, Evan Byrne just comes around Pouon now then, as he's currently up on his personal best in the first sector, as Galloway tries to have a go at it. That is Griffiths, he's trying to have a go at down into Pouon, but it's not work out there. Of course, Galloway last time out, obviously on lap 2 of the race, I think it was, or it may have been a little bit later. It was in the other stages, of course. He crashed out, of course, thanks to being taken out by Andre Vaderi, which resulted in Vaderi getting a 10-second time penalty. And he'll want to try and redeem himself if he can this weekend, Ra.
Yeah, of course, day to forget for Galloway, and yeah, he really wants to redeem himself, and he is doing well so far this season, but of course, that's like situations like this, it's not what you want.
No, definitely not. As well, speaking of Galloway, he's just been re-overtaken again by Rahul Patel. As I was just checking back on the stream there, as Rav, is he going to go for the move on the Williams in front? I don't think he's close enough, so he's just going to stay back. As meanwhile, Byrne gets himself into the top 10 and goes up into 8th, so 8th and 9th now for the two Renault drivers. And well, we mentioned as well that Perinen is also a contender for Red Bull should he miss out on Renault. But could you imagine the scenes, Ra? And if Byrne ends up dragging Jesus with him to Red Bull, just imagine the scenes. It'll be Renault implosion, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be. Would have been very interesting if those two were Red Bull. And I'm gonna be honest, even during the sign-ups, even before the sign-ups goes, I thought Jesus could have gone for Red Bull as his first choice, but he didn't. I feel like he did
Oh,
the
no
right
problem.
thing not to. Ooh, no, that's him going wide.
Oh, I thought that he was going slowy there. But you were saying, right, was Griffiths just making a mistake at the top of Radion there? But go on, you were saying?
I was saying I was a little bit surprised that he didn't go for Red Bull as his first. Ooh, very close to Galloway there.
Mm. As you can see there, yeah, Galloway very lucky that his session didn't come to an end there. Same for Griffiths on that matter. But yeah, you were saying there, Rob, before we saw that.
Yeah, I was saying I was surprised that Jesus didn't go for Red Bull as his first race, but I mean he has to go for the tactical game. So if he has if Renault has more number one picks than Red Bull, then technically he could go for either of those seats.
Yeah, indeed, and obviously, as we mentioned, Renault have got a lot to choose. Of course, I did put the pick order, of course, in the pilot episode, and also if you're on Discord, I put it in the announcements channel as well for anybody who is curious what this season's pick order looks like. As we now look at Evan Byrne, he's just coming out of the Jackie X corner now. Then, as he makes his way down towards Pouon now, then as we have just under 15 minutes to go in this practice session. As now he will make his way towards turns 12 and 13 on the racetrack now then. As obviously, last time out for Haas, we were talking about Haas a little bit earlier on, and in the case of Williams as well, it wasn't exactly the best weekend for them, as Lopez has a bit of a moment going down through into Pouon there. But yeah, not the best weekend for those two teams, and obviously 16th and 19th for Williams, and in the case of Felix Sontag, it was a complete disaster because he was the only driver to be 2 laps down on the rest of the field, and the Haas's were only 17th and 18th, a track that really didn't suit that car that weekend, Raw.
Yeah, they really struggled, and they were pretty much on one stops, which didn't work, and they were really struggling with the mediums. And yeah, a race to forget for Haas, and even worse situation for Felix Sontag to finish behind both of them. And yeah, disappointing for Felix as well.
Byrne, meanwhile, goes into 6th position. He was actually down on his personal best in the first sector, but he seemed to have found a lot in the last 2 sectors there. As Galloway, meanwhile, gets up into 7th place in the Ferrari. Chung is up on her personal best, but it looks like it's going to get compromised now because Felix Sontag is in the way. As Chung comes out of the second part of Blanchimont, is she going to try and make a move on Sontag into the last chicane? Let's see. And she is thinking about it. Of course, let's not forget, Williams are getting supplied by Lamborghini engines in 2022. So I guess Felix is getting a mirror full of what to expect when Lamborghini arrive at the team in 2022. As Byrne again down on his personal best in the first sector, currently in 6th position at this stage. So we're just over 13 minutes to go. This is what the leaderboard currently looks like then. Adventure, the Red Bull test driver, is currently top with Chatfield in 2nd, Willows in 3rd, followed by Quarg in 4th, then it is Garber 5th, Carr in 6th, then it is Byrne 7th, Galloway in 8th, followed by Lopez in 9th, Perinin in 10th, then Motrin 11th, De Rosa in 12th, Patel 13th, Cupot 14th, then Chung 15th, Kloss in 16th, with Vaderi 17th, and then we have Anderson in 18th, Fraser in 19th, Sontag in 20th, Gal 21st, and Griffiths in 22nd, as De Rosa actually gets up into 12th position as I was speaking there. But Motrin has come back into the pits, currently in 11th position. Byrne now he makes his way through turns 12 and 13 as Adventure now comes into the pits in the Red Bull as he's currently at the top of the time sheets on a 2-minute 3.204 with just under 12 and a half minutes to go in this session. And looking around at the rest of the drivers, of course, obviously for Lamborghini, we talked about how it was a bit of a mixed session at Hungary, and it wasn't exactly the best race for yourself, Rav, either, because only managing 8th place, it seemed that the strategy that you were on didn't really work out in the end.
Yeah, the fact that it was the free stop, I feel like he really used the tires so much that that the strategy really didn't work. He really struggled with the tires, I would assume. So yeah, disappointing day from him.
Indeed so, as we now look at Felix Sontag, who's currently still holding up lower Chung. In fact, Chung has not been able to get past him at the moment. And in fact, he's got one of the Red Bulls in front. That will, of course, be Franco Gamba, because Adventure is in the pits. Galloway, meanwhile, gets up into 5th in the Ferrari. So he now just slots behind Roman Quarg at this point. Chung again trying to get by on Sontag through Blanchimont there. Not going to work out. As we now ride on board with Evan Byrne in the Renault. As Chung is actually coming into the pits this lap. And so keep it tidy, and she does. I thought for a minute there was going to be a collision between Sontag and Chung, but it didn't quite work. Luckily, it didn't come to that way. As Byrne, meanwhile, is now up on his personal best in the first sector. So something to keep an eye on here as he makes his way around Bruxelles now then, before making his way towards the Jackie X corner. As now Jackie Ixie goes, as now we look at Julius Anderson, who's trying to get by on one of the Alpha Towers down the straight, that being Miklos Gal. And De Rosa, meanwhile, gets up into 8th. And Miklos Gal, of course, only one Alpha Tower driver got confirmed this week. But do you fully expect Gal to be retained, Ra? Or do you think things are going to happen which will lead Andrioli to get that seat?
I do believe that Gal will stay with AlphaTauri. There's no question that he will be retained. If he somehow drops off in performances during the season, might not be surprised if Andrioli gets it, but we'll see.
Meanwhile, Julius Anderson currently up on his personal best. I thought I saw a little bit of a wiggle for him to put on there for the Swedish driver, who of course got driver of the day last time out at the Hungarian Grand Prix. As Anderson now then making his way through into turn 14 before making his way towards Stavlo. And I do think that mistake may have cost him a bit looking at the death panel there. As now Galloway tries to put a dive on Jesus Perinen, and luckily no contact there as Byrne gets up into 4th position, although it did look like there was maybe a little bit of a slip there for the Ferrari, and it was. You could just see there, look, maybe starting to aquaplane, so maybe very lucky he didn't career into the back of Perinen there.
Yeah, very lucky for Gunway and also lucky for Brennan not to get hit, of course.
As now we go down the straight, Galloway crosses the line and does not improve thanks to that, so he stays in 6th position. He's now trying to overtake Perinen into La Source there, and very close to contact, but didn't quite happen there. As Byrne, meanwhile, here he is, coming down the Camel Straight. As Griffiths, meanwhile, in the Williams, has just gone up into 16th position, getting in front of the Haas test driver, Bartish Kloss. As Galloway up the hill he goes, still stuck behind Jesus Perinen's Renault at this point. Perinen currently in 11th position in this practice session. Anderson, meanwhile, gets up into 16th position as Galloway tries to look onto the inside of Perinen now. They're heading towards Lecombe. As Byrne is actually down his personal best in the first sector. Sontag, meanwhile, gets up into 15th position now that he's not got Chung bothering him. And Sontag now into 15th place in the Williams with just under 9 minutes to go in this practice session here at the Circuit des Spa Francorchamps. As Byrne now then makes his way down towards Pouhon now then. Using a bit of curb on the outside as he now makes his way towards turns 12 and 13 through the right and then into the left-hander now then he will go as we now look at Byrne, who's now coming towards turns 14 and 15 on the racetrack. Let's see what his second sector looks like. It is actually up on his personal best in the second sector by a tenth of a second. So whilst he was down on the first on his personal best in the first sector, he seems to have gained it back in the second sector. In fact, we saw this yesterday as well during the qualifying session, that whilst you might be down in the first sector, you seem to gain a lot of time in this middle sector, and that's mainly because there's a lot more characteristic in the middle sector than there is in that first sector.
Yeah, and of course, first sector is more on straights. Of course, there's only one corner, well, pretty much one braking zone in that first sector, and the second sector, you just hope that you pretty much have the car to ace it.
I mean, well, it does improve, and I think either goes up to 4th or remains in 4th. I didn't quite catch that on the timing tower on the left-hand side. Meanwhile, Chatfield is being held up now by Julius Anderson. Of course, these two were in a little bit of a battle at the Hungarian Grand Prix last time out, battling for 5th. Initially, Galloway got the move done. Not Galloway, Chatfield got the move done, but Anderson was able to get him towards the end of the race there. Galloway, speaking of which, that's why I had him in my head, has got up into 5th position, gets himself in front of Roman Quagg as Griffiths goes up into 16th. Car is coming into the pits, and so the Mercedes will be coming in. Luckily, not making contact with the Williams there as he now makes his way into pit lane, just as Franco Gamba was coming towards the scene. As we now ride on board with Evan Byrne in the Renault, just making his way through into Bruxelles before making his way towards the Jackie X corner. So with just over 6 minutes to go, this is what the leaderboard currently looks like then. Adventure top with Chatfield in second, Willows in third, Burn fourth, then it is Galloway fifth, Quarg in sixth, followed by Garber seventh. Hold that thought because DeRose is now in fourth, Burn in fifth, Galloway in sixth, Quarg seventh, Garber in eighth, followed by Carr in ninth, Lopez is in 10th, with Perinin in 11th, then it is Motra in 12th, Patel in 13th, Kupok 14th, Sontag 15th, Griffiths in 16th, with Chung 17th, Anderson in 18th, Kloss 19th, Verderi 20th, Fraser 21st, and Gal in 22nd position as Galloway is getting held up still by, it looks like Rahul Patel, I believe. And no, it isn't. It's actually Laura Chung, in fact. So it's actually Chung that he's getting held up by. As we now look at Evan Byrne now then, he just makes his way towards Blanchimont now then. With just over 6 minutes to go. Down on his personal best at this stage as he's currently in fifth position. The McLarens are currently third and fourth at this stage in this practice session, with Willows in third and DeRosa in fourth. As Byrne now makes his way towards the chicane. Meanwhile, the Haas test driver, Bartosz Kloss, gets up into 14th position, as he'll be looking to do everything he can to get back in the top class in 2022 with the team that he made his original debut with in the top class back in 2015. Byrne across the line, no improvement. He stays where he is. As Willows improves but stays in third. He's actually now just 93 thousandths off of Chris Chatfield at this stage. And then back in the pits he goes, as he seems to be struggling at the moment on those wet weather tyres. Did 14 laps out on the track during that running practice. Whether we'll see him again before the end of the session, we will wait and see, as there is only 5 minutes to go, and lap times here, of course, are around 2 minutes. So that's that, as one of the Lamborghinis makes their way into pit lane. And so as now we look at Nicolas Gal, who's now coming back into the pits. Gal currently at the rear of the field. And, of course, if he does remain at AlphaTauri next season, we know that Kupok is, but if he does remain at AlphaTauri next season, then Gal will be hoping that the car will be a lot better than what it is this season. Same with David Kupok, really. As we talked about earlier on in the season, how Gal was expecting... whilst he was expecting it to be a challenge at AlphaTauri, it's fair to say he wasn't expecting it to be this much of a challenge, where the car is basically one of the slowest on the grid. Sontag, meanwhile, gets into 13th. Meanwhile, Byrne up on his personal best in the first sector, but whether he can keep that up in the next two after winning. In fact, he's 9 thousandths up on Adventure in the first sector, so that could be something to keep an eye on. Meanwhile, DeRosa has now got up into second position, just 6 tenths off of Daniel Adventure. I was about to say fellow compatriot before realising DeRosa changed his nationality to Italian this season. And it's interesting to note as well, because Adventure has actually put German as his nationality in the DTM sign-up. So interesting there. I don't know why he's put that. I don't know whether that was a mistake or whether he genuinely meant that. I'm not sure. But anyway, as he's now actually down an Adventure in the second sector, so it seems that Adventure's time is mainly gained in that middle sector. Is he 6 tenths down in that middle sector, but still about 3 tenths up on his personal best. Byrne now then, just coming around Blanchimont now then. And he makes his way through the second part of Blanchimont before making his way towards the last chicane now then. And let's see what Evan Byrne can do now then in the Renault. I do apologise if you can hear Discord notifications in the background. It seems that Evan is quite chatty, it's fair to say. But anyway, as Willows now then comes into the pits, the question is, can Byrne improve? Because he was up on his personal best, and he does, but he remains in fifth. He's actually only just 1 thousandth behind the man who's actually just come into the pits, that being Joseph Willows. As Byrne stays in fifth position, as Willows makes his way back towards the McLaren garage, and I would imagine that will be his practice session done with, due to the amount of time that's left on the clock and due to how long it takes a driver to get back around the circuit to start a lap. As Perinin will actually give himself one more lap, in fact, to go out on track. As we now look at Willows' teammate, Kirishima DeRosa, who just comes out of turn 13. I'm not sure if he made a mistake there, but he is up on his personal best in the first sector. Let's see what his second sector looks like. Still up on his personal best, but he's 4 tenths down on Adventure, as it's 1 tenth up on his personal best now then for DeRosa. As now we look at Kirishima DeRosa, who makes his way through into Blanchimont there. No, DeRosa has not got the flu. That came out wrong with my tongue there. I don't know why I said that. But anyway, as Byrne now then comes around turn 8 now then at Bruxelles, before making his way down towards the corner with no name. And so As he now makes his way down towards P1 as De Rosa does improve but remains in second. He's now 4 tenths behind Daniel Adventure. And Chris Chatfield will give himself one more lap before the session comes to a close. And so as Chris Chatfield now then makes his way through into the right and left-hander now then on the racetrack. And so as Byrne now then makes his way through the right-hander, as Byrne now then, let's see, he's currently in, well, he's down his personal best, and he's actually coming into the pits this lap because he's being held up by the Ferrari of Chris Chatfield. Surprise, surprise, because these two, for the last couple of seasons, like to hold each other up. But anyway, as Chatfield will be starting a lap and Byrne will be finishing his session, because of course we saw he's got the pit indicator on the top of his screen. Barger's Kloss, meanwhile, in the Haas, getting up into 9th place, so brilliant job there from the Haas test driver as Byrne comes into the pits to complete his practice session. And so that's that really for the Irishman. As now we come towards the remaining part of the session as Adventure's up on his personal best. Can he improve? Across the line he goes and he breaks into the 2-minute 2s. A 2-minute 2.671, 1 second clear of Kirishima De Rosa. So maybe we're seeing a lot of improvements towards the back end as we're going to remain on board with the drivers for the remainder of this practice session. Laura Chung across the line, she will go in the Lamborghini, and she goes into 14th position. Here comes Lopez, who's also up on his personal best. Across the line, he will go now then. And can he improve? And across the line he goes, and yes he can, but only into 11th position now then. Cupart currently being held up by Carr, it seems, so no improvement there for David Cupart at the moment as he makes his way onto pit stop now then. We've got just under a minute to go in this practice session now then. Cupart across the line, no improvement. Patel getting one more flying lap in before the session comes to a close as Anderson is up on his personal best. Meanwhile, in the Aston Martin, he's got also Garmer behind who's up on his personal best, but he's probably lost a lot of time thanks to being held up by Julius Anderson. But anyway, Anderson now then across the line he will go in the Aston Martin. Across the line he goes, and he goes into 15th. Garmer goes into 6th. It could have been a little bit more if he wasn't being held up there by Julius Anderson. Roman Quarg, no improvement, stays where he is as Roland Motrin's coming back into the pits to complete his lap as Fraser was down on his personal best in the first sector, but he's now up on his personal best by nearly 0.3 of a second, but still 2.4 seconds off of Adventure in that middle sector. Fraser comes around Blanchimont now then, as he now makes his way through the second part of Blanchimont before making his way towards the last chicane now then on the racetrack. Making his way now then towards the bus stop chicane. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Checkered flag is out, and that is the end of the session. Who was last across the line? I'm not sure. It was, well, not Sontag, because he's only just come out of the pits, but he'll be last across the line regardless. It'll be Quarg. He'll be, in fact, he's got a pit symbol. But anyway, across the line went Fraser. He didn't improve, and he stays in 19th position. He seems to have lost time in that last sector. Here comes Barcher's Kloss now then. Across the line he will go in the Haas. Across the line he will go before handing the keys back over to Wilson. Goes up to 6th. Not bad from Barcher's Kloss there. Trying to send a message to perhaps for Haas to potentially give him a little bit of another look in, really, in terms of the 2022 silly season. Anyway, Chris Chatfield now then comes out of the final chicane now then in the Ferrari as he makes his way onto the pit straight, and across the line he will go now then. And he does not improve, but Adventure does. He goes to a 2-minute 1. It seems that he used a bit more slipstream. And he's now 1.8 seconds clear now of Kirishima De Rosa. A brilliant session from the Red Bull test driver. Here comes Laura Chung now then, who makes her way onto the pit straight. And across the line now then, she will now come. She's on an improvement, but across the line she will go, and she goes into 7th place there. Perinen also on an improvement. Across the line it goes to Spaniard. He goes into 6th. Lopez also on an improvement. Across the line he will go, and goes into 11th place. Here comes Jamie Griffiths now then, making his way onto the pit straight now then, and across the line he will go now then in the Williams. So across the line he goes, and no improvement, stays where he is. Carr, no improvement, stays where he is. Cupart goes 15th. Patel is also on an improvement in the Lamborghini. Down the straight he goes. Currently down in 18th position is the Indian driver, and Patel comes across the line now then in the Lamborghini and goes 15th. Anderson on his final flying lap makes his way onto the pit straight, and across the line he will now go then in the Aston Where is he going to place himself? And he goes into 13th position. Garber doesn't improve. He stays in 9th. And Quarg actually comes back into the pits, which means that's the session done with Adventure top, DeRosa second, and Chatfield third. So can't really draw any conclusions there, Rob, because of the wet conditions.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much a mixed session. Of course, it's been crazy. The order's not really legit, of course, but we'll wait and see when it comes to qualifying.
Indeed so. Well, we're just going to take a brief break for a moment and then we will come back with a fresh stream for the qualifying session. But in the meantime, I've been JW97, he's been Ra, and we'll see you in just a little bit for the qualifying session. See you in a bit.